This morning, CNN filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration for revoking the press credentials of Chief White House correspondent Jim Acosta. You may remember the White House took the action after a contentious back and forth during a press conference at the White House last week. There's a lot to discuss here. Joining me right now is CNN's chief media correspondent, host of Reliable Sources, Brian Stelter, and CNN legal analyst Paul Callan, who is also a former professor of media law. Thank you both for being here. Brian, first and foremost, can you lay out for us what's in the lawsuit? Yeah, the head of CNN says this is not a step that was taken lightly, but the White House's action last week was unprecedented. And that is true. I've looked at the law in the past here. There's no other case where a White House correspondent like Acosta has been kicked out, has had his press pass revoked after asking tough questions at a press conference. So the White House has been coming up with shifting explanations for why his pass was revoked, but it's been suspended for almost a week now. CNN tried behind the scenes to get it reinstated, sent letters, made requests, and said if we have to, we'll sue. So now here Tuesday morning, we're at the point where the lawsuit has been filed. It alleges that Acosta and CNN's First and Fifth Amendment rights are being violated. So freedom of the press and also due process, because up until now, for decades, there's been a really specific standard for when credentials are granted and when they're revoked. Basically, you're always going to be allowed in unless you're a threat to the president's life. And of course, Acosta is not a threat to anybody. So as a result, CNN is saying that this is a violation of the First and Fifth Amendment. What's the White House saying in response? And just a few minutes ago, Sarah Sanders, who is one of the 6 defendants in the suit, issued a statement. We can put a part of it on screen. She says, "We've been advised that CNN's filed a complaint challenging the suspension of Jim Acosta's hard pass. This is just more grandstanding," she says, from CNN, and we will vigorously defend against this lawsuit. She went on to say CNN has nearly 50 additional hard pass holders, that means daily press pass holders, and Mr. Acosta is no more or less special than any other media outlet or reporter with respect to the First Amendment. So the White House is saying, hey, everybody else is allowed inside the White House. We're not blocking everybody. But that's actually part of the point here. They are trying to pick and choose who's able to cover the White House and who's able to ask questions of the president. And no past president has tried to engage in that kind of control. I also think it's really noteworthy, Kate, that we're seeing shifting rationales here. Last week, the White House claimed that at the press conference, Acosta placed his hands on a White House intern. I'm going to play that in just one second. But first, Paul, I just want to get your take. I mean, first, there are clear First Amendment issues that are obviously part of this lawsuit. And Brian bringing up the Fifth Amendment issues. What's that about? What is CNN saying?
Well, CNN is saying essentially that what the president and the White House is seeking to do is restrict a reporter's access based upon the fact that they don't like the reporting that's being done by CNN and possibly by the reporter. Now, that's called content-based discrimination, and the First Amendment is very clear on that the press has a right to report and express opinions regarding the president's conduct. The second part is the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment, which says if you're going to try to restrict anybody's access, you better have a good reason. There has to be a hearing demonstrating the good reason. No such hearing was granted to Acosta here. There's also a third cause of action against the Secret Service specifically. But it looks like a very, very strong case. Most First Amendment experts think under existing U.S. law.
I do want to focus on how this came about. This came about after the press conference last week. In the White House, that is when the White House took Acosta's credentials. And when they took Acosta's credentials, they said this. This was the first statement why they did. "We will, however, never tolerate a reporter placing his hand on a young woman just trying to do her job as a White House intern." The video and the facts show otherwise. But the White House statement is very clear on what they were basing this on. And then the president said this about it Friday.
"I think Jim Acosta is a very unprofessional man. I think he does this with everybody. He gets paid to do that. You know, he gets paid to burst in. He's a very unprofessional guy. Whether it was me or Ronald Reagan or anybody else, he would have done the same thing. Look, I don't think he's a smart person, but he's got a loud voice. And here, wait, David, do you mind if I answer the question? And as far as I'm concerned, I haven't made that decision, but it could be others also. When you're in the White House, this is a very sacred place to me. This is a very special place. You have to treat the White House with respect. You have to treat the presidency with respect. If you've ever seen him dealing with Sarah Huckabee Sanders, it's a disgrace. And he does it for, the reason. The same thing with April Ryan.
So the president's not talking about an alleged assault there. If he was talking about an alleged assault, he wouldn't be threatening other reporters. He wouldn't be threatening April Ryan. And then you have this new statement saying that Acosta was preventing them from an orderly and fair press conference.
From a legal standpoint, he completely undermined the White House defense, because if he was saying that this was Acosta inappropriately touching an intern who was trying to take his microphone, he threw it out the window now. He's talking about all the reporters, and he may ban other reporters, and what happened with Ronald Reagan. All of this indicates that this is not conduct-based, but it's content-based. In other words, under the First Amendment, he's trying to ban certain press people from covering him.
And in today's statement, there's no comment about that intern. Instead, it's a general claim that Acosta's rude or unprofessional or disrespectful. Well, you know, respect is not a matter of law. In fact, CNN's complaint says the argument that Acosta wasn't sufficiently respectful at the press conference is not sufficient as a matter of law. So that may end up being the argument here. The White House is going to say Acosta's rude, he's a showboat. But you know what? Different White House reporters have different styles. And if that's been true for decades.
That's right. And if you're going to establish a system where conduct determines whether you can attend a press conference, the White House would have to have a set of rules on this, indicating what conduct is improper, and then that could be tested in the courts. But they've chosen not to have any specifics that would apply to this situation.
And if I can say, I think the big picture here is that CNN's taking this action because it's not just about Acosta. It could be a reporter from the New York Times or NBC or some other outlet next week. CNN's taking this action because this is a big free speech issue, even though it involves a single reporter in this one case. The president, you know, he's been engaging in this kind of out-of-control behavior, lashing out at the press. He seems to be acting out more and more.
Well, now,
and this is going to be a test in the courts.
And now a judge is going to have a decision on this.
He'll have the decision. And you know, the principle here is that he doesn't have to have press conferences. But if he has press conferences, the First Amendment requires him to give free access to the people who cover him. And I think the White House is going to have a problem with this lawsuit.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Coming up, we'll bring you updates on this, obviously, as they come. Coming up.